Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Provost Mary Boyce, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Provost Conversation on Online Learning. And what a great talk we have for you today. In this seminar series, we invite leading experts to share their perspective and vision on the future of education, specifically around online education and educational innovation. And through such conversations, we aim to learn and share our distinguished speakers' knowledge with our colleagues and viewers around the world to enhance teaching and learning at Columbia and beyond. I'm excited to introduce today's speaker. Todd Zipper is the president of Wiley Education Services, where he serves as the general manager of both University Services and mthree, which is part of Wiley's Talent Solutions offerings. Todd leads their mission-driven business to help universities, students, employers, employees, shareholders, and society unlock their potential. Todd is also the host of An Educated Guest, a podcast series that brings together great minds in higher ed to discuss the innovations and trends guiding the future of education. Todd earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Penn, and very happy to say that he also earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. Please join me in giving Todd a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Solomon. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm so honored to participate. As you mentioned, it was about 20 years ago when I first stepped foot on campus. It's amazing how time flies. And I really went to Columbia with the purpose of leaving a career in finance, interestingly enough, because obviously Columbia is so well known for its finance program, and beginning a career in entrepreneurship, specifically in education. And here I am 20 years later as a graduate of the school, talking about education and the future of education. So I am going to get started. The agenda here for me today is we've got 3 sections to our discussion. The first, I'm going to share some details about my organization, Wiley. Then I'll walk through some key findings from a recent survey that we conducted on the online learner. And third, for the bulk of the section, we're going to talk about 5 key trends shaping higher ed today that have my attention. All right, so let's get started here. So Wiley, who are we? We've been around for over 210 years. It's hard to believe, but when we partner with universities, we often date similar dating back to, I think it was Thomas Jefferson was president when we came into existence. And we've been from the beginnings connecting individuals, universities, employers, and researchers with the content, platforms, and tools they need to be successful. Publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, one of the oldest companies on the stock exchange. And here are some stats just to anchor you on who we are. We have close to $2 billion of revenue. We have over 7,000 employees. We serve in 22 different countries. We have 11 different lines of business. And this is an interesting stat. We are 80% digital. The reason why we bring that up is most people know Wiley for its books, its textbooks, its trade books, and we've evolved a lot over the years. And we are definitely in the digital revolution. Our business is really centered in 2 critical areas: research and education. For the customers we serve, we're delivering on our mission of unlocking human potential by making research available to everyone and bridging the gap between education and employment. Wiley has 3 business units: research, academic professional and learning, and education services. I run the education services portfolio. Through our university support services, we're partnering with universities to deliver high impact learning experiences and degree programs. As you can see here, we provide end-to-end support services spanning market strategy and program planning to student recruitment and retention, and also offer flexible models for how we work with schools. Through our talent solutions, and specifically mthree as a business unit, we're helping corporations access the next generation of tech talent through our hire, train, and deploy model, which we'll discuss in the session. Through these pathways, we're helping universities and companies deliver career-connected education, clearing barrier to entries to career readiness for learners, and bridging the skills gap. And we're going to talk a lot about more in a second. All right, so in our University Services division, we support a wide range of institutions across all demographics that include regional universities, large state universities, and even universities that are ranked top 10 nationally. We also serve universities outside of the US in 2 other regions, EMEA and APAC. In every case, we're delivering tech-enabled services to help our partners reach a large population of students to drive impact. We are most proud of the total number of graduates as seen here that we have helped our partners produce over the last several years. We're going to speak a little bit more deeply in a few moments about the widening skills gap. At mthree, we work with over 700 university partners globally and more than 25 corporate clients all over the world to address this challenge. Simply put, mthree provides training for high demand tech skills, and then places those individuals with employers seeking those skills. As you can see from the list of corporate logos here, we work with many of the largest financial services institutions in the world and are now expanding outside of the sector given the growing need for tech talent in every sector. Before we get into the trends, I want to share a few key findings from a survey we recently conducted on online learners. Hopefully these insights will help separate the noise from the signals in the midst of intense change we are seeing. We've been in the business of online education for over 20 years, and a big part of our focus is observing, studying, and deploying market insights. These insights are derived from a survey we recently conducted with over 3,000 online learners, including prospective and current students and recent graduates from Wiley supported programs. This survey provides the largest publicly available data and was born out of a decade of surveying the online learner. This reimagined report serves as the market-leading source of insights about the distinct online population. In the next series of slides, I cover the main questions that guided us in our research. So, how has the pandemic shifted the online learning market? 33% of our 3,000 respondents who are now looking for online learning hadn't even considered it pre-pandemic. Isn't that amazing? Is this a bubble, an accreditation, an acceleration of existing trends? Only time will really tell. We do know these potential students are a little different than our traditional online audience. More on that on the next slide. So what about the perception of online? Is that changing too? Over half of our respondents said they have a more positive view of online learning since the pandemic. For those in programs when the pandemic hit, 45% felt their experience changed for the better. So the 33% of people from the prior slide who hadn't considered online learning before the pandemic are a little different than our typical online learners. So who are they? That's what this left side of the page shows. Their average age is younger. Many of them were looking at undergrad now. They are less likely to be employed full-time. They're often beginning in their careers, and they on average are closer to campus. So what are they looking for? They want transfer credit policies are often important to them. Many of them are bachelor completer students. They are more in favor of synchronous learning, campus visits, and feel a little bit more like a traditional student. They also are generally have more concerns, may need more support services and general handholding. We asked the question, if the program you wanted was not available in an online format at the school of your choice, what would you most likely do? In short, enroll somewhere else. Our data shows that if the program isn't available at your school, there is a 65% chance of losing that student. Overall, we found that 75% of these students are sticking with online. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but we got some great information here through this survey. Do online learners want to come back for more? Yes, many online students appear to be lifelong learners. Here are some really cool stats. 79% of online students would choose online learning again. 63% of students would go back for another degree. And this is an exciting one. Of all online students, 1/3 plan to enroll at their alma mater. So will you attract students from across the country? This is one that is often asked of me. And in some cases, maybe, but often no. The trend is that, let me pull some of these stats up here, is that students are choosing programs closer to home. I love this data because we've been doing this for a decade now. If you look at 2014 versus 2021, you'll see that approximately 54% of students were studying within 100 miles in 2014. So certainly that has many students outside of a typical catchment area, but that has increased to 63%. The real exception here is around more national branded schools and graduate students as well, who are finding the program they need often outside of their area. But it's typically becoming more local as more and more choices come online. All right, so can you design a one-size-fits-all program? While there are, let me just pull up the stats here. It's really interesting. While there are popular program elements, no program can appeal to everyone. So you can see here some really interesting data. I'll list some of them. 87% value multiple start dates. 68% favor a program with an asynchronous format, which means that 32% want that cohort style synchronous format. And that's something, let's say, that I had when I was back at Columbia. So it does vary. I think the important point is you really need to understand your target market, who you're serving, and make sure you're designing a program around that. So how can you best meet the affordability needs of online learners? This is an interesting one. This doesn't mean that you're looking for the cheapest program by any measure. But here are some interesting stats. 55% of students stated affordability is really important to them. It's an important part of the decision. And 39% of students reported tuition and fees was a main reason they chose not to enroll in a program. And yet 33% chose the program with the lowest tuition. So I think it's important you're taking tuition into consideration when you're serving the online student. Another interesting data point was that 94% of students say a modest scholarship can impact their decision. So ultimately, students don't want a cheap degree, they want good value. So how can you best meet the affordability needs of online learners? This is a good segue into our next set of slides, but using employer benefits and partnering with employers. So nearly 2 out of 3 students with tuition benefits are not using them. So that's a huge gap. And yet 24% of students that we surveyed are using them. So universities should continue to work closely with employers to help employers better tap into these benefits. And we're gonna be talking a lot about that more in a second. All right, so let's jump in to the 5 trends of higher education that I'm seeing. These are trends that are interesting to me. They might be not exactly ones that you're all following, but I do think that when I think a lot about career-connected education, I think a lot about what learners need to be successful in their jobs, and that's what's threaded throughout these 5 different trends. So here's a quick look at the 5 trends. The first 2 are uniquely different, but are driven by employers taking a more active stance in education. The third trend is the rise of the scale direct-to-learner platform, followed by the rise of the mega nonprofit university, and then finally, the StudyAB cheating challenge. So let's get started with the first 2 trends. These are what I call employer-driven trends and are driven by the same 4 dynamics: technology adoption, a double disruption of automation and the pandemic, a growing skills gap, and the war for talent. All of these components build on one another, as you'll see and as I walk through them with you. The pace of technology adoption is expected to remain unabated and may accelerate in some areas. The adoption of cloud computing big data and e-commerce remains high priorities for business leaders. However, there's also been a significant rise in interest for encryption, non-humanoid robots, and artificial intelligence. Technology adoption by companies will transform tasks, jobs, and skills in the not so distant future. It is not so far off when the time spent on current tasks at works by humans and machines will be equal. So there has been a double disruption in labor market. First, automation is affecting skills at a rapid pace, with jobs being destroyed and new roles appearing. And second, the pandemic-induced lockdowns and economic contraction also led to jobs being destroyed that will never come back, as well as new roles appearing. So let's talk about a growing skills gap. We just talked about the tech transformation and disruptions that are happening, which are related, which leads us to this skills gap and the war for talent. Let us get into some of the numbers. Here's what we find ourselves as reported in September 2021. 10.5 million job openings that we know of, 8.5 million looking for jobs. That is quite a disconnect. And that's really the current state. Now let's look at the future state. The World Economic Forum estimates that by 2025, 85 million jobs may be displaced by a shift in the division of labor between humans and machines, while 97 million new roles may emerge that are more adapted to the new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms. So what does this mean? When you think about the war for talent, you've got, we know we're going to have a skills gap of 85 million students. We're going to have a talent gap of new people we're going to have to enter the workforce of 12 million. So what does that lead to? It leads to a lot of confusion, a lot of need for talent, and a competition around that. And one data point that we just pulled, and I actually think the September numbers or maybe in the October numbers are greater than this, 4.3 million quit their jobs in August alone. The number is even greater than that in the last couple months, which just kind of annualize that in the US, and we are at unprecedented levels, right? And that's creating real challenges within the workforce today. So let's get into something that is, you can just kind of, hopefully your eyes don't get too distracted here, but what you're looking at is that the clock of industry and the clock of education can never really sync up. Industry runs at one speed and education runs really at another speed. It could take a year or two to launch a program in an accredited program at a university. In those 2 years, industry could have moved forward as much as 10 years. So the clocks are misaligned. It can be easy to write this off as wholly a bad thing, but the reality is a lot more nuanced. There is qualitative difference in the skills that are taught at university and the skills that are needed in industry. They serve different purposes. Universities are double downing on theory, research, and experimentation, argumentation, learning, and even the love of learning. Their philosophy is less about getting you ready for a specific job and more about getting you ready for life. Opinions on this are, of course, divided, and the economics of going to a university are less clear-cut than they were once upon a time. However, a few big influential players, such as Google, are experimenting with eliminating degree requirements for entry-level roles. So this is something we really need to pay attention to. But this is a different ballgame with different pros and cons, and many organizations continue to look for university education as the foundation for an entry-level hire. Why? Because they believe that it is still has value in the world of work, and it always will. So this gives you really good backdrop now for how can organizations close this skill gap. And I want to talk about a new talent acquisition strategy here, two of them. One is centered around how we bring in talent or talent acquisition, which is called hire, train, deploy. The second one really is about enhancing that talent and or talent development, and that is education as a benefit. And I put the 2.0 in there, you'll see, because it's really an evolution of something that's been around for a while. So what is hire, train, deploy? Let's start with hire. An HTD firm like the one that we own at Wiley called mthree, you see this on the right side of the equation, works with college graduates through a rigorous process. Today at mthree, we hire mostly computer science and STEM grads with good GPAs, and we screen them for technical abilities and soft skills. One way to think about this model is employer down or right to left education. In most cases, we have a client, location, and specific job in mind, as well as an actual job opening before we actually make the hire. Okay, the second piece is the training. This model looks a lot like the immersive bootcamp experience that has emerged over the last decade with a few caveats. The training often has a level of customization for a specific employer and industry. At mthree, we are training for highly sought after jobs in technology, such as software development, data science, production support, cybersecurity, and DevOps. Over the last year, we launched an HED program even in business services, which is a lot less technical. Third, the next step is deployment. Trainees, or what we call alumni, get embedded with clients. Our focus started in the financial services sector, as you can see here, but we have many multinational corporations, and we are deployed now in over 9 countries. The fourth step is around support. So we don't just place these people in these partners of ours, we actually help them along their journey, which typically lasts 1 to 2 years, with support. We engage them, we provide them upskilling, we provide them mentorship, and we use technology to track all of this along the way, just like a university would track retention throughout. And finally is the conversion to no cost to the alumni, or to, which is alumni is the term for the person actually going through the program that's employed by mthree, or to the corporation. The goal ultimately is to get these folks as full-time employees at that amazing customer that we've working with. And that's where we are. So it's a really simple model: hire, train, deploy. So I want to talk about the benefits of hire, train, deploy if it's not already clear. So let's start with the benefits to the organization. First, we're going to talk about the broaden and exclusive access to talent. Employers increase their reach in recruiting great people and great custom programs, driving exclusive pipelines of talent. Second is around performance and impact. By creating customized curriculum, the emerging talent has already an intimate understanding of an employer's stack. Employers are often cited as saying it takes about 6 months before new hires are starting to add real value. This model allows employers to bring that value creation forward. Furthermore, the employer has a partner in mthree to continue to help in the development of that talent. Let's talk about diversity. This is increasingly becoming a focus of employers. And for us at mthree, this has been a strategy of ours from day one. So right now, today, we have about 50% of our hires are considered diverse population, and about 30% are women, which in both cases is well above the averages. Fourth is around location. So multinational corporations have operations in many countries and need a singular strategy to recruit and train these individuals. And we are able to do that and provide that sort of quality control to our partners. Let's talk about the influence over attrition, right? This is a huge issue. We're talking about the war for talent. They have a partner in mthree that has a vested interest in keeping those students going along their entire 1 to 2 year journey when they're part of the mthree pipeline. And finally, they have a fresh talent constantly of new thinkers they could bring into the organization. Now let's move to the benefit for graduates. Well, very simply, they get paid while you train, right? It's the whole learn while you earn, and that's a huge advantage for them. Second, they get access to jobs they really can only dream of. Even when students go and graduating from the best corporations, they can't necessarily get the best jobs. And we have that exclusive pipeline working with a growing level of corporations. Third, this is unique to the staffing business and to to this hire, train, deploy market. But some of our competitors out there use what's called training bonds, right? Because they're putting so much cost into this learner and have a vested interest in their success. So they have what's called a training bond on it. We do not do that. So to the graduate, they can decide to leave after a month or two, and we're okay with that. We have no locking them in. And the reason why we do that is we ultimately want them to have a journey that works for them. And if at some point they feel like they can get better paid or they can find something elsewhere, we want them to be able to leave. And in many cases, when they get to about the 9-month mark, they start to become really valuable at that corporation. So for us, it really forces us to up our game to make sure we're providing them the support they need so they want to stick with that journey all the way to the end. And they have flexible start dates, right? So to a learner, yes, many are graduating sort of in the late spring, some in the winter, but really it's a continuous process for the corporation and when they have their hiring needs. So depending on when they're graduating or if they're just out of college, we have classes starting every single month. We actually are having our largest class ever in November. And of course, the last one I mentioned, continuous development and training. All right, so that sums up hire, train, deploy. I could have spent the entire session on just that. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions, but I'm going to keep going. I've got about 15 minutes to cover the remaining 4 trends. So let's talk about the education as a benefit 2.0, but we're still in the employer-driven education area. All right. So as corporations grapple with the 4 workplace dynamic of technology adoption, double disruption, skills gap, and the war for talent, recruiting and retention has really intensified. So let's talk a couple stats. Employers have been investing in their employees for decades. In the US alone, about $17 billion in tuition assistance is available annually, and about 90% of these employers use tuition assistance. And yet, traditionally, only a very small percentage, you can see here, 3 to 5%, actually use these funds. So what does this mean? Employers are becoming a lot more strategic as they have to up their game to recruit and retain better. We have 3 themes here that we're seeing. The first is they're becoming more prescriptive about which programs are covered. Second, they're focusing a lot more on skills-based education. And third, they're taking a bigger role in influencing the price of education. So let's get into this 1.0 to 3.0 thing that I'm talking about here. So what does 1.0 look like? Put simply, traditional degrees from the learner perspective, really, and oftentimes at a discount and often delivered by regional colleges and universities. Very little technology administration, very little tracking and data for the employers to understand the ROI of this. Then bring in 2.0, which we've been in this evolution for several years now, and is really as we think about this, because I've divided this into really 3 areas: technology, the learning network, if you will, and the services that are provided. And almost universally, these companies are moving away from just this tuition reimbursement to helping employees build what we're calling education to career pathways. So you think about it, somebody joins a corporation, they don't want to just know, oh, I've got this benefit and it can help me pay for college or a graduate program. I want to understand actually how I can get from point A to point Z in my career. And employers are really starting to take a vested interest in this. Something that really hit home for me was about a few months ago when I was watching a football game. I saw an advertisement from Starbucks. This was just Starbucks. You would think advertising Starbucks. It seemed like it was an advertisement for new hires. The first thing that they talked about was their employee benefit around the zero cost education through Arizona State University partnership. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to see and then they're going to help hopefully retain these students longer. They're going to help recruit students more, and they're going to build the reputation of themselves. And you're seeing a lot of corporations, especially large-scale corporations, sort of, I wouldn't say copy Starbucks, but move in that direction. And you're seeing Amazon do a lot of that as well. And so when you look at these 3 areas of services, learning network, and technology, you're seeing a lot more technology to bring to bear to really help administer these complex programs, to provide the type of data. you're seeing a learning network that goes from not just typical institutions, but high school diplomas, skills-based providers, everything, and you name it. And finally, the level of services that can even consult with those employees along the way to make sure they're using those benefits in the right way. So now I'm going to switch to the third trend. Hopefully you're taking notes and you're getting your questions ready for me. Over the last decade, we have seen the rise of many direct-to-learner platforms that have millions of learners. Some are in partnership with traditional higher education. These are often looked at as like the MOOCs. We got Coursera, we got edX, FutureLearn, Emeritus. These are just some names, and we call these the higher ranked sort of D2L scaled platforms. But there's also the non-higher ed scaled platforms like Udacity, Udemy, and Masterclass, to name a few. All of these have multi-billion-dollar valuations. They all serve many millions of learners, it appears, and they have access to really what seems like unlimited capital of deficit financing. And so why did they emerge? And so what I'm showing on the right side of the page here is just some thoughts around that. The shortcomings of the traditional higher ed model. We got higher tuitions, we got long programs, we got inflexible delivery, largely synchronous versus an in-person. Long lead time from an actual application to an enrollment, where you could enroll immediately on these platforms, and oftentimes a dated pedagogy. You also couple that with changing learner preferences, right? Everyone's used to technology that feels like, ordering a taxi on Uber. You got demonstrable, also career outcomes. That's becoming increasingly important to the learner. They want that ROI and they want to understand that right away. They want to learn on the go, and they want that consumer grade experience. So the mega integrated platform has reached real scale at this point. Some numbers that are staggering to me. You've got about 19 million US traditional higher education students, and I think Coursera alone talks about 80 million learners, which is quite incredible. Let me bring up some of these things. So what does this really scale imply? And that's what I'm going to try to unpack for you all today. So the first thing is lower student acquisition costs, right? They are able to produce such a wide net at the top of the funnel that they can really bring down the cost of acquisition on the margin for a potential learner. And as you know, even just seeing some of the strategies between Coursera and 2U now owning edX, they can offer that learner a lot of different types of educational products, from free all the way to expensive degrees. The second thing is access to corporations. If you follow in the Coursera's and Udacity's, they are not just partnering with a few dozen corporations, they're partnering with hundreds, it appears now, and trying to become an education platform for that. And one thing that I thought was quite interesting is we see the rise of huge corporations like Google. Coursera and Google announced, I think it was a project management certificate, where even though Coursera was built on the backs of the Columbia Universities of the world, they are replaced them in that standpoint. It's really Google and Coursera offering that learner a career certified program, essentially. And so, to me, I put it as a question here: are D2L platforms, more of a competitor than a friend? And I think it's a little bit of both. And I think it's something you need to really follow closely. But one really incredible innovation in this area in the last decade was the Georgia Tech Udacity Masters of Science in Computer Science program, which came from a former dean of Columbia. And incredible program, doing incredibly well now. And interestingly, both decided to go their separate ways. Udacity is certainly serving corporations at scale with incredible technology programs, but Georgia Tech is going on its own through its own way. And so I think, both can have merits in the way, but you can see you need innovation like what Georgia Tech has created here. And it's just worth noting that, they've really figured out things like price and program length and user experience are things that are the innovations that they're really tapping into here. I'm getting close to time here. I've got about 5 minutes. So I've got two more. The rise of the mega nonprofit, right? Which sounds probably a bit like a Star Wars sequel of some kind. So what is that? So I think these are some interesting stats that I just kind of wanted to put here, and you could just check out these graphs, and it's not clear. I think to understand the rise of the mega nonprofit, I think you need to understand the rise and the fall of the mega for-profit. So back in 2010, you had about well over, I think it was, or just about 10% of enrollments were with the for-profit sector. They grew almost 1.5 million at the time, which was huge. And at the same time, the non-for-profit sector sort of lost share, but it was really this for-profit sector creating a new market to largely online. And then over the last decade, from 2010, to where we are today, you've seen a ton of enrollment increases in the non-for-profit sector, going from sort of a 90-ish% market share to about a 95% market share. And so, this is a graph on the left side that I really like, because it really shows, one school in particular, University of Phoenix, which, by the way, was almost 500,000 students. That doesn't even show it here because we only go back to 2012. But you can look at the Western Governor, Southern New Hampshire, Arizona State University in particular, even Grand Canyon, which is an interesting one because they are technically a not-for-profit now, even though they were what's called a for-profit conversion. You can see some of these other ones, Liberty University, University of Maryland here. Now, look, all of these schools have done incredible things that I just mentioned in terms of the innovation around online, serving a huge catalog, taking, frankly, a lot of the good best practices out of the for-profits and leaving some of the bad ones behind. And so I think you've got a situation now where you have schools that are, I think, here to stay in terms of these larger mega nonprofits that maybe the market didn't pay as much attention to. But I do believe that there's an impact of this trend. And so I'm going to jump right to it. But right now, I probably have more questions than answers, but I'm just going to throw some questions here and give you my take. So what influence would this small group have on policy? I think they're going to have a lot more. I think if Southern New Hampshire, let's say, gets to 300,000 students, which I think they're approaching 200,000 now, I do think they're going to have a lot of influence on the market when, 10 years or so ago, they were at about 3,000 students, right? So there's going to be a whole new set of universities that are going to influence where we go as a sector. How will they shape the learning for this generation? I think they are very focused on what's called the new majority. That's the adult learner, the worker, the person that's very job linked and they're thinking about education. And so I think they're going to be pushing education more in that direction. Do I think this is defensible? I'm not sure. And why I say I don't think so is I do see this rise of the copycats, if you will. We've got University of Arizona now making their play with the University of Arizona Global Campus. You got University of Massachusetts, who bought also a not-for-profit actually called Brandman to sort of scale this out. So I think I think you're going to see, like that original slide that I said, the more localization in certain cases. I think you're going to see strong regional brands sort of get their market share back, if you will, which I think will prevent some of the Arizona states and Southern New Hampshires from maybe they get to 200,000 students, but I don't think they're going to get much beyond that. So I just mentioned more competitors. I'm just being a little conscious of time here, and that I think we're going to see a lot more alignment with education, the way a lot of these mega nonprofits have done around job outcomes, market, and pricing. Western Governors, great example of that. Really the one major player that's focused on competency-based education and seemingly doing an incredible job at that. So let's talk briefly about the StudyAB cheating challenge. That's a bit of a mouthful. So I'm just going to pull up really what I'm calling the perfect storm of factors that sort of led to this. You got infinite broadband connectivity. You got ubiquitous technology, right? Everybody's got a smartphone and can use it in a second. You got transactional coursework. Like a lot of the grades that students are getting are homework, true, false, multiple choice type of questions. You got an emphasis on what I'm saying, lack of emphasis on long-term learning outcomes. So it's not actually rewarding students, let's say, for achieving these job-like, competencies, but they're kind of more doing these summative assessments, if you will. The pandemic led everybody to go at home, online. It sped everything up. And then finally, you've got this, almost like big data combined with cheap labor, all these things factoring, is somebody's got a question, they pipe it in there, there's probably already an answer ready to go. So you can kind of just do the math on what all that means. And so let me just, this is kind of, when I look at something like this, like the top 3 platforms have 80 million monthly users. I'm not sure how that's all divided, but I know, let's say Chegg for one, I think they're approaching something like 4 million subscribers in just alone, which I think in the US, something like that. So that's really large. So let me just jump right to it. Suggested actions. And I think this is interesting. I'm just going to read you a couple things. I was doing some research on this, and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, there's a quote here. They actually created a technology to catch possible cheating, right? So this is going on. So the idea, I'm saying maybe ban or discourage these platforms. The reality is that often doesn't work with technology, right? I was thinking about how cities tried to ban Uber or Lyft, the ride-sharing apps, and that didn't really work that well. The reality is, and going to the 5th point, these platforms are quite incredible. They're cheap. The learners are getting on-demand information. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. But my second point here is a focus on competencies, really changing assessments. And so it's, thinking about even going to this third one I'm calling credit for experience, going back to even thinking about the M3 model that we talked about, hire, train, deploy, using internships, apprenticeships, X credit. I just learned about this model through the design lab. And that's incredible, right? Thinking about how people are going through their work experience and then giving them credit for that. So I think it's trying to really understand that learners are going to probably keep using this, but I think there are ways to combat this. And the 4th trend that I said here, and I'm going to stop because I've gone on for 40 minutes about now, is what I'm calling ethical study assistance. So really starting with the faculty and maybe partnering with one of these apps or another app to think about how we can use it in a way that isn't ultimately helping people cheat, which we know it is to a large degree. So with that, I'm going to just a refresher here on what our 5 trends are that I'm studying, and us at Wiley are trying to help our university partners to evolve and to bring solutions to the market that can sort of take advantage of these trends, surf these waves, if you will. And I think it's just that the last point that I would say is just that this is all really thinking about the jobs, the marketplace, where are we, and not just kind of sitting in oftentimes the ivory tower of education and academia, but knowing that things are happening, those clocks of education versus industry are moving so fast. So how can we ultimately bridge that gap between the innovations that are happening in the market and the realities of what the educational system is today? So that's it. Solomon, thank you so much for having me here today. I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Todd, for this really very informative presentation. We're really grateful to you for sharing so many insights with us. So I think this is the time to move to a Q&A session, and maybe we can go back to gallery view and stop sharing slides. And what I'm actually hoping we can do right now is, as our colleagues think about questions to ask you, I'll start with a couple of questions. So, you touched on this, Todd, during your presentation. Can you let us know what makes Wiley's approach to supporting and servicing online degree programs, with a university like Columbia, unique from other OPMs? And in particular, how do you see yourself compared to other generalist and specialist OPMs and fee-for-service firms in this market?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think for us, it ultimately starts with partnership. Wiley goes back decades, if not centuries, really understanding partnership, investing in the long-term in partnership. We are not often wedded to short-term thinking. We're much more of a long-term thinker. And I think that is what a university partner ultimately needs, because they think in terms of generations and years as well, as does Wiley and the Wiley family, frankly, that we're in our 5th chairman as in terms of Wiley's publicly traded stock. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is we take a very flexible and customer-driven approach to partnering. So whether that's with revenue share, which is the kind of the evolution of the OPM model, or fee for service, or some combination of the two, we've been doing that for a while now. It's not a one size fits all. The third thing is we've been very focused on, I don't want to say being a low cost provider, because that sounds cheap, and that's definitely not what Wiley is. But we've always felt that this is the university's program. This is their brand, and this is their economic interest. And so for us, we've been very focused on building a very competitive cost structure at Wiley so that we could provide revenue shares that are much more, frankly, in favor of the university. So we average somewhere between, let's say, 30 and 40% rev share, and sometimes lower, depending on a bunch of different factors, which gives the university a lot more economic control over their future. Another point is we build performance targets, if you will, opt-outs, another way to think about it, into all of our contracts. And so that is something that early on, it's a model that you don't want a performance out to, let's say, be in the first year or the second year, because you need long-term thinking, you need investing. But after 3 or 4 years, as long as you're aligning early on goals around those programmatic enrollments, it's really important, I think, to have ways to opt out of a contract. So if a university said this really isn't working anymore and you're not hitting the performance, which is what one of the main points of this whole thing is, it allows that university sort of take back control. In line with that, a kind of a cousin to that is, in the business term, build, operate, transfer. We are very comfortable with, let's say, signing a 5-year or 7-year deal with the school. And we did this even within a college, within a large university, one of the most prestigious universities located in Baltimore. We knew after 7 years, they wanted to take back one of their very important programs. So we spent 7 years building it, growing up to one of the largest online MBA programs in the country. And they took it back over, and we still provide, much smaller set of services, more on a fee for service basis. So again, it's just thinking about things as a partnership, thinking about in a very customer centric sort of way. The last thing I would say is we're very market driven in an approach. I have to marry up the presentation to this, is that really understanding the market, understanding what prices resonate with learners, understanding what jobs they're looking for, and really connecting the education to those ultimately career outcomes that they want. That's a huge focus of what we do at Wiley, which is why we even got into the business of M3. So I'll stop there and get us to our next question.
Thank you, Todd. That was a wonderful question, a wonderful answer. My second question, and then we'll go to the audience, is if you could comment a little bit about the edX acquisition by 2U and how you see the future of the OPM world with now 2 dominant players in the market, 2U and Courseware.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't spoken to my colleagues at 2U, but the obvious, reason for that is twofold. One is they now potentially, again, I think they haven't tested it out because they weren't partnered with edX. They potentially now can upsell, or if you will, more expensive degrees that they have in their portfolio to millions of learners that are sort of coming into the edX.org website for MOOCs, for free courses, for short course, or for curated, short course formats, et cetera. So I think that's, one potential reason. The second potential reason is they now have relationships with get even more universities, kind of like with their with what I saw from their trilogy, and I'm not sure how that has played out, but now they could go and try to upsell more services to those university partners. And then third, and I think this is equally as important in a segue to Coursera, is now they have a direct to learner connection, which they did not before. Before, they essentially had to go on behalf of their university partners. And that's a very attractive thing, which I'm saying as a competitor to theirs, that now they can build that relationship with the learner and potentially change the dynamic with their university partners, because now they're bringing learners to the equation versus the other way around where they had to bring universities to learners. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd. So I'll turn it now to our colleagues in the audience for their questions. Please raise your hand if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Suleiman. Todd, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I wanted to get a little bit more of your perspective on, you mentioned the possibility of, for the apps or the apps that have been traditionally associated with, I guess, cheating on campuses. You mentioned the possibility of faculty partnering with such apps. I guess, do you have any examples of like where that could lead to, and what are the potentials for that?
Yeah, sure. And I should have probably said this, but Wiley, we're alpha. We've got an alpha product right now. Forgot what universities we're experimenting with, but we started with the faculty member, and we sort of uploaded the syllabus, and we are essentially around the higher stakes exams. We're building preparation based on our quasi artificial intelligence platform called Newton, to sort of not give them answers, but to help them prepare in a much more self-directed, individual learner way. So depending on where they are in their journey, we would be focusing on their deficits around the content. So that's kind of how I would think about it. I mean, this is very selfish of just saying Wiley is looking to do this right now versus making it a relationship that's outside of the faculty purview. And then the faculty has to stop these things and I guess log on to Coursera or Coursera and these places and check and say, stop doing that. That's, but they can't keep up with that. And they shouldn't be relied upon to even do that, in my opinion. It's putting too much work on the faculty's plate. And so instead they can use it. We actually, the code name, if you will, inside of Wiley is called virtual teaching assistant. That's what we call it, because faculty need teaching assistants, right, to really help them and their learners succeed. And so it's this virtual way of helping assist these students, because they can't do it all and they should be helped through technology. And that's what we think.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Hi, Todd. Oh, I'll let Maurice go first.
Yeah.
Hey, Todd. Quick question. Thank you for your talk. And coming from Wiley, I was also thinking a little bit about online education and the overlap between that and the textbook model, and whether textbooks, which are permanent and become sources of, say, a discipline's content, the creating more attractive or more interactive textbooks and online courses. What is your perspective on that angle, again, coming from Wiley?
Yeah, I think that's the absolute direction of travel. So for example, we acquired a company about 2 years ago called Zybooks. And they are, I think, one of the leading platforms of kind of courseware for computer science, a lot of 100, 200 level courses. And they're not a traditional textbook. They're getting updated daily for content and labs and interactions. So I do think that this idea of the traditional publishing model is going to increasingly decline, and this idea of more interactive courseware that's kind of threaded through the experience is going to increase. But there's still, the disruption is unclear. We've got these subscription models and where that's going to all play out. We don't quite know, but I think we're absolutely in an upwards cycle of more of these courseware-like products that are continuously updated versus this once a year, platform, even digitally, that's there.
Sandesh?
I thought, great presentation.
Thanks.
So, community is very important in learning, as you know. And we've seen over the past 18 months or so that, it's vital to online learning. So I'm just curious how Wiley is servicing and supporting things like, community building, social learning and online experiences, and how do you do it? Is it baked in through at the design stage, or do you bring in like a mix of like very interesting educational technology solutions? I'm curious to hear more.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's increased even more so with everybody being online. I would say first, I would kind of answer it with two vectors. The first vector would be the support that the school, or the school, let's say, working with a third party like Wiley, needs to be consumer grade, if you will, because I believe that that's what leads to a better connection with the school, believe it or not. And so you can't just set and forget. I mean, we didn't talk about this during the MOOC in the direct to learner platforms, but they really creating a community of learners. Their learners are grading each other's papers, but I don't think they're actually creating that experience. And so whether it's in the enrollment process, whether it's the matriculation process, you need to provide support for those learners, to kind of the entire community of support. That's the first thing. The second thing is absolutely in the design of the courses. You need to be building in discussions, interactive activities that allow the learner to feel community within their courses. And I would argue that I think if you do those things, you're not having to worry as much about them going to a football game or a basketball game. They're getting is what they need ultimately in that experience. And the last thing I would say is, where appropriate, I do think that a lot of learners do crave for some kind of campus experience, even if it's a very light one, even if it's through graduation, even if it's in the summer. And I think for certain types of programs, especially at the level of Columbia, I think learners are willing to travel, maybe not internationally, and let's kind of move beyond the pandemic restrictions. I do think there are ways to kind of create those community-like experience that don't overwhelm that individual in their lives, that I think connect them more so to the university. So those three things are what I would be focused on.
Thank you, Nigel.
Hello, sorry. Thank you again, Todd, for this presentation. I think you made some really good points about like how online education is growing and how it's diversifying based on like different learners' needs. I recently read an article in the Wall Street Journal about how USC had an online program for social work where they really exploited their students and like overcharged them, and they ended up like, I guess, more disenfranchised than empowered. And so my question for you is, when it comes to online learning and as we all work in ed tech, what are some of the principles and kind of best practices that we can do to make sure that we're empowering students and not exploiting them? And when I say students, I mean learners. So empowering learners and not exploiting them.
Yeah, this story obviously hits home because it's a graduate program. It's a competitor of ours in OPM, partnered with USC, and to me, I think it has to, going back to right to left education, it has to start with what are the outcomes for this program. So let's talk about Columbia Business School MBA, which is not online, but let's say it was online. They certainly could charge, I was a student, that and a lot more, right? Because the outcomes of those learners and the way they bring in students, the return on investment for that learner will most likely be excellent. When you take a social worker that gets, let's say, an average salary of $50,000 in that range, and you advertise to them an incredible brand like University of Southern California, and you tell them they could get pretty much any loan they want to go to that program, there is a fundamental flaw in our system. And so I don't know what's going to happen, and there's a lot of noise within this story because a lot of it's wrapped up in the OPM model, which we're in. But I would argue that programs in general need to have stronger outcome-driven assessments and accountability. So to here, it would be simple debt to earnings ratio calculations, right? How are your graduates at USC MSW working at $115,000? Not good. Too many are defaulting on their loans. Okay, USC, you need to be held accountable to that, right? And I think that's the issue here. is, I don't think there's a lot of these types of programs. There could be. We certainly don't have a $115,000 MSW program, but we're acutely aware, even if we're not, and the system isn't being held accountable, of outcome-driven education. We think it needs to be. And we think the Department of Education needs to step up here and do something about this. And we'll see what comes out of this story. But I mean, they're already talking about bringing the program from $115,000 to $84,000. I forgot if that was the right term. That still might be, where are you coming up with that number? Because they're probably starting with their costs and not actually what the job outcomes, the salaries are of that thing. And by the way, their graduation rates weren't like 100%, right? So they're probably bringing on too many students that can't be successful in that program. So that's something that they need to think about. Versus Columbia Business School, when I went, it was like 99% of the students graduating. The ones that didn't got an incredible job at, some hedge fund or bank or whatever it is, that they could get out there, leave after the first year. So it's okay. But great question. Really, I appreciate you asking that question, Nigel.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Nigel. Marina?
Hi, Todd. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. I really liked what you said about the 2U acquisition of edX and potentially changing the relationship with the learner and going directly to them. So I wonder what that changes for Wiley and other ed tech providers like Wiley, in this market. Of their relationship with the universities and with the learners as well.
Yeah, I mean, for us, look, it's an attractive model. I'm not going to say it's not. We've taken, a slightly different approach to our long-term success, starting with the idea that, employer, as I mentioned, sort of in my first two, employer-driven education is going to be an extremely important part of the equation. So we've made significant investments, both inorganically through the acquisition of mthree and organically through the building of something called Wiley Beyond, that we're going to bring that employer much more into the equation to help our universities. And so that's one way to sort of, aggregate, potential student demand, but also bring job opportunities here to the equation. We also have a global OPM approach, as I mentioned. So we're in already, I think, 4 or 5 different countries. That helps us with diversification. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it helps us to run a global type of OPM. And so, for us, I don't imagine that we're going to own some scale. There's not many of them left. One of these platforms. We'll sort of see how it ultimately does. We also want to appreciate and respect our university relationships. So we're not sure how that model would work as we partner in the way we do today.
Thank you, Marina and Todd. So I think I'm gonna ask you the last question, which is, if you were to come back to Columbia and address this group again in 5 years, what trends in online learning do you think you would be discussing?
Outside of the ones that I've already talked about, I think, universities need to focus on what they believe they do best. And so chasing, let's say, a trend is something I would only do if it made sense. So, right now I would be concerned about the direct to learner platforms as a way that, looking at Coursera, that only worked because they got University of Michigan, University of Pennsylvania and the likes to sort of sign up and drive that initial demand. So to me, I think it's trying to change that balance of power. The second thing is, and I mentioned this, is the relationship with employers, even though universities like Columbia have had them forever, I think are going to be even greater. The influence of the Amazons of the world aren't declining. And so when you have a university as strong as Columbia, I would be looking to partner directly, not through Coursera or edX. Like I mentioned, Coursera has these relationships now, but looking to partner more directly. with them. Additionally, I think that the cost of education is something that has to change. It doesn't have to change in every circumstance. Like I mentioned, it's not about being cheap at all. And in some cases, programs should be expensive because they deliver incredible value. But I do think something like Columbia would be served well on leveraging their brand to a wider market and defining what that market is. And so I do think there are going to be some prestigious brands like Columbia that are going to serve a larger market than they do today, because certainly the market would love that brand to do that. It's just about trying to figure out where on the sort of that value chain you can do that. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this Provost conversation on online learning. Wonderful pleasure to have you as we explore a partnership between Wiley Education Services and Columbia University. Thank you for being with us today. Thanks everyone for attending. And we look forward to having you again for our next conversation.
It was a real pleasure, and hopefully next time I'll get to visit campus.
Surely. Thank you, Todd. Take care.
All right. Bye, everyone.